Jack Colton stood at his kitchen sink, staring through a foggy window as rain tapped steadily against the glass. Each drop echoed the bitterness lodged in his chest. The storm outside wasn't half as cold as the one that had been living inside him for the past 7 years. They say war changes a man, but war hadn't broken Jack. Retirement hadn't either. Betrayal had. In combat, you know who's aiming at you, he muttered, voice low. But at home, you never see the shot coming. Jack wasn't the kind of man to wallow. A 57-year-old former Army logistics officer, he'd hauled equipment through war zones with a busted foot and a bullet in his shoulder. But nothing had prepared him for the day he came home early and found his wife Heather laughing on the porch swing next to his business partner Troy Bishop, shirtless and smug. That was the day his life splintered like glass under boot heel. The two people he trusted most had stolen not just his company but his sense of solid ground. Still, Jack hadn't crumbled. He raised his son Luke alone, kept his name off the police blotter, and stayed quiet while Troy paraded around town in Jack's old company truck, now plastered with a new logo. But Jack hadn't forgotten, and he hadn't forgiven. Today, as the wind howled through the oak trees and the coffee turned cold in his hands, he knew this wasn't just another gloomy morning in Texas. Today marked the beginning of something he'd spent years preparing. His son was graduating. The guest list was filling up. And somewhere out there, the two snakes who stole everything were planning their return. Jack stared into the storm and whispered, "Let them come." The betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, calculated erosion of trust, masked as friendship and love. Jack Colton had poured everything he had into building Colton and Bishop Home Services, a modest but growing repair and renovation business serving 3 counties in North Texas. After 20 years in the Army, he wanted stability, a way to support his family and give his son Luke a shot at something better. He ran the operations side with military precision, while Troy Bishop, a former neighbor and ex-handyman with a salesman's smile, promised to drum up contracts and charm the clients. And Heather, Jack's wife of 15 years, was supposed to handle the books from home. But Jack was too busy in crawl spaces and attics to notice what was happening behind his back. The lies started small: missing receipts, double-billed invoices, unexplained client gifts. Then came the long stretches where Heather wouldn't answer her phone, and Troy always had a reason to work late. Jack brushed it off as stress. Everyone was working hard. Everyone was tired. But then one evening, he came home early from a canceled plumbing call and found them together in his living room, laughing, sharing wine, like they'd built the life he was financing without him. Heather didn't deny it. Troy didn't apologize. In the divorce that followed, Heather demanded half of everything. Even the business Jack started from scratch with his GI Bill savings and a borrowed pickup. Worse, Troy had already registered a new LLC and poached Jack's top subcontractors. Within a month, Colton and Bishop was legally dissolved, and Bishop Home Solutions was buying Google ads with Jack's old customer testimonials. Jack was left with a half-renovated house, a teenage son, and a reputation in shambles. Heather moved into a new condo with Troy and showed up at Luke's basketball games just long enough for Instagram photos. Troy drove around town in a new company truck, flashing his fake smile and shaking hands with the same men who once called Jack the most honest contractor in town. But Jack didn't rage. Instead, he started watching, waiting, planning. Because deep down he knew something about people like Troy and Heather. If you let them dig their own graves long enough, all you have to do is hand them the shovel. Jack Colton never shouted, never threatened, never stormed into courtrooms demanding justice. That wasn't his style. He knew noise only gave your enemy time to hide. So, while Troy Bishop and Heather flaunted their stolen success like prize pigs at a county fair, Jack went quiet, but not idle. He cut expenses, downsized, and poured what little money he had left into something far more valuable than revenge: information. With the discipline of a seasoned soldier, Jack began building a case brick by brick. He reached out to an old army buddy, Marcus Bell, who now ran a small cybersecurity firm out in Lubbock. "I'm not asking you to hack," Jack had said plainly. "Just help me see what they're hiding." Marcus did more than that. Within weeks, Jack had access to Troy's business filings, subcontractor payments, and strangely inflated repair invoices that didn't match city permit records. Meanwhile, Jack hired a quiet, sharp-witted PI named Macy Durham. Former insurance fraud investigator, mid-40s, never smiled unless she meant it. She tracked Troy's meetings, flagged shady clients, and uncovered a pattern of kickbacks tied to unlicensed labor and phantom jobs billed to out-of-state investors. But what made Jack's stomach churn wasn't just the fraud. It was that Heather was listed on nearly every contract as a silent co-owner. That was when Jack knew this wasn't just betrayal. It was a long con. So he doubled down. Over 2 years, Jack began cataloging every piece of proof. Photos, signatures, payment logs, and even overheard conversations Macy recorded using parabolic mics during client dinners. He encrypted it all and stored it in multiple drives, one with Marcus, one at a bank deposit box, and one hidden in plain sight on Luke's old iPod, tucked inside a box of Boy Scout patches. But Jack wasn't just gathering evidence. He was preparing for a reckoning. He'd trained Luke in situational awareness, reviewed bug-out protocols, and quietly replaced the backyard floodlights with infrared security cams. Heather and Troy thought he was a broken man, but Jack wasn't broken. He was building a battlefield, one that they'd walk right into, smiling. The sun hung low over Jack Colton's backyard, casting a warm orange glow over rows of folding chairs, balloons tied to fence posts, and the smell of slow-cooked brisket drifting from the smoker. It looked like a typical Texas graduation party, but beneath the laughter and country music was a trap laid with military precision. Luke, now 18, was the first in the family to graduate with honors, and Jack wasn't going to let Heather and Troy turn his boy's milestone into another photo op. He knew they'd show. Heather had called last week all syrupy and sweet, claiming she wanted to reconnect for Luke's sake. Jack had played it cool. Sure, come on by. But he knew better. They weren't coming for closure. They were coming to finish what they started. Over the last 6 months, chatter picked up through Jack's sources. Troy was under pressure from an investor tied to out-of-state money laundering, and Heather had been digging around, asking questions about Jack's finances, his home layout, even Luke's whereabouts. The timing wasn't coincidence. Jack suspected they were planning something reckless, dangerous, so he acted. Jack called in favors from his army days, 6 old squad mates who owed him more than a beer. They blended in at the party dressed as caterers, security detail, and even a hired magician for the kids. Each man had a role, a post, and a concealed weapon. The perimeter was under surveillance, emergency protocols rehearsed. At 5:42 p.m., Jack's phone buzzed. It was Macy. "Heads up, they're on the move. Not alone." Jack glanced across the yard, eyes narrowing. He spotted Luke laughing with his friends near the pool, oblivious to what was coming. Jack took a breath, then moved toward him, all smiles. "Hey, bud, can I borrow you for a minute?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Luke raised an eyebrow but followed. In the house, Jack handed him an envelope, a burner phone, and the keys to his old pickup. "You're going to Uncle Rick's, right now." "What?" "Dad, the party just started." Jack's voice dropped. "This isn't just about graduation anymore. It's about survival." Luke stared at his father. Confusion edged deep into his brow. "What do you mean, survival?" Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he shut the curtains, checked the window, then turned back with a look Luke had only seen once, when Jack caught a rattlesnake under the porch with his bare hands. "Son, I've kept a lot from you," Jack said quietly. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed you to grow up safe, without carrying the weight I've carried." Jack motioned to the envelope in Luke's hand. "Inside is everything you need if I don't make it through tonight. Addresses, passwords, legal files, even a letter. And that phone? It's clean. If you need to call me, only use that. Luke's face paled. Dad, what's happening? Jack's voice hardened. Heather and Troy didn't just steal the business. They built their new one on fraud, bribes, and stolen contracts. And now they've tied themselves to people who don't leave loose ends. Luke sat down slowly, the reality crashing in. You've been tracking them all this time? Jack nodded, gathering evidence, watching every move, and I think they found out. Tonight might not just be a party. To them, it might be a hit. Silence hung heavy until Luke broke it with a whisper. I have to tell you something. Jack tensed. Go on. Luke looked up, eyes glassy. I already knew about the fraud, about the tracking, about the burner phones. Macy told me 6 months ago. I've been helping her compile the digital files. I bugged their office last month when Mom invited me over for dinner. Jack blinked, stunned. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to protect you, Luke replied, and because I needed to know the truth with my own ears. Jack's hands trembled as he pulled his son into a tight embrace. You've got your mother's smarts, he muttered, but you've got your old man's grit. Luke pulled back just slightly and whispered, Whatever happens tonight, it's not your fault. Jack looked into his son's eyes and saw something more than youth. He saw loyalty, strength, and a determination that matched his own. As the last of the guests filtered out, Jack Colton stood alone beneath the soft twinkle of string lights, their glow casting long shadows across the now empty yard. The silence was deceptive. Calm before a storm he had long anticipated. The security team was in place, hidden in plain sight, watching from the trees, the garage, the shadows. Jack didn't flinch when the back gate creaked open. Always did know how to throw a party, Troy Bishop called, stepping into view with that same smirk that once charmed investors and stole Jack's life. Heather followed close behind in a sleek black dress, eyes scanning for Luke. 2 armed men flanked them, stiff-jawed and poorly concealed weapons bulging beneath their jackets. Jack offered a slow nod. Didn't think you'd miss the big day, he said evenly. But this isn't your celebration? Where's Luke? Heather snapped, voice tight. Jack's jaw clenched, but his tone stayed calm. Safe, far from this mess. Troy stepped forward. We know what you've been doing. Digging, spying. Diane's been feeding you information, hasn't she? Jack met his gaze. You're worried about Diane? You should be more concerned with what she gave me. 3 terabytes of evidence. Wire fraud, bribes, fake invoices. And oh yeah, that little meeting with the out-of-state boys who don't like exposure? Troy's smirk faded. You're bluffing. Jack shrugged. Try me. That data's already in the hands of the feds, and if anything happens to me or Luke, it drops to every news outlet in Texas. Heather's voice turned ice cold. You always were dramatic, Jack. She gave a subtle nod to one of the men who reached for his weapon. Jack had planned for this exact moment. He pressed a button on the underside of his watch. Instantly, the yard plunged into darkness. A split second later, the sprinkler system hissed to life. Not water, but a custom chemical mix, designed to disorient, sting eyes, and leave enemies stumbling. Shouts erupted. One of the thugs fired blindly. Jack moved like a ghost, ducking behind the grill, then sweeping across the yard toward the patio, his terrain mapped in memory. Then he saw it. Luke crumpled on the stone path near the pool, blood soaking through his white dress shirt. Jack's heart dropped. Luke! He screamed, bolting forward, bullets be damned. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he checked for a pulse. But before panic could take him, Luke opened one eye and whispered, Did it work? Jack exhaled a ragged breath, half laughing, half crying. The vest had held. The blood was fake. Floodlights exploded to life across the backyard, bathing the scene in sharp, blinding white. Heather, Troy, and their two hired thugs staggered through the chemical mist, coughing and clawing at their eyes, utterly disoriented. They didn't even see the 6 men emerging from the shadows. Jack's old unit, rifles raised, steady hands, eyes locked on target. "Drop the weapons!" barked Franklin, the team lead, voice cutting through the chaos. One thug complied instantly. The other tried to draw, but was disarmed and pinned to the ground before he could finish his motion. Jack stood calmly at the center of it all, the storm he had summoned now crashing down in full force. Troy dropped to his knees, drenched and gasping, his face twisted in disbelief. This was a setup? Jack walked over, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. It was justice. And it's been coming for a long, long time. Heather, mascara streaking down her face, hissed, "You turned Luke against me. He's my son too." "No," Jack said coldly. "You made a choice when you walked away from him. You made another when you tried to use him. He made his choice when he saw who you really are." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Jack turned toward the driveway just as a convoy of black SUVs and unmarked cruisers pulled up. FBI agents swarmed into the backyard with practice speed, weapons raised, vests marked Federal Agent. Leading them was Agent Kendra Hall, sharp-eyed and calm. She gave Jack a nod of respect. "Mr. Colton, right on schedule. Evidence is ready," Jack replied, handing over a small hard drive. "And the rest is in your inbox, time-stamped and signed." The agents moved quickly, cuffing Troy, Heather, and their goons. One of the Marines handed over the 2 concealed pistols and a folded note. Meeting locations, bank accounts, even photos of their shell companies. Troy thrashed as the cuff snapped shut. "You don't know who you're messing with. I've got protection." Jack didn't flinch. "You had protection. But when your new partners found out you targeted me, they dropped you faster than a hot bullet." Troy froze. "The Castellanos already disavowed you," Jack finished. "Their oldest boy served in my unit. I saved his life in Kandahar. Guess who they believe?" Heather turned to Jack, desperation rising. "You can't do this. This will ruin us." "You ruined yourselves," Jack said flatly. "All I did was shine a light." The yard was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the calm before a storm. It was the quiet after a war. Empty folding chairs sat crooked in the grass, and the scent of smoked brisket still lingered faintly in the air. Jack and Luke sat side by side on the back porch steps, the adrenaline finally draining from their veins. Luke's hair was still damp from the chemical spray, his fake blood-stained shirt draped over a nearby railing. He broke the silence with a dry chuckle. "Most kids get gift cards and dorm supplies at graduation. I got a bulletproof vest and a crash course in deception." Jack let out a tired laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, not exactly what the guidance counselor recommends." They sat for a long moment, watching the stars blink into view. Luke's voice softened. "I thought I lost you back there when I saw your face, when you thought I was gone." Jack's hand tightened gently on his son's shoulder. "That was the worst 2 seconds of my life. I don't care how much training you have. Nothing prepares you for that." Luke nodded, eyes distant. "I used to wonder why you never fought back, why you just took it all in silence. But now I get it. You were never giving up. You were just waiting for the right moment." Jack smiled faintly. "I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for you." The next morning, Jack Colton stood alone at the edge of his backyard, coffee in hand, watching the breeze sway the empty string lights above the patio. The yard looked nothing like a crime scene, just a father's home after a celebration. But Jack knew better. This was the field where betrayal had been confronted and beaten. He exhaled slowly, the weight of 7 years finally lifting. For a long time, He'd imagined what revenge would feel like, but it wasn't rage that settled in his chest. It was clarity. Betrayal has a price. And Troy and Heather had finally paid theirs, not just in court dates and headlines, but in something deeper. Exposure. The very truth they tried so hard to bury had been brought into the light by a son they thought was too young to see it, and a father they thought too broken to fight. Jack reached into his pocket and thumbed the dog tags he still carried from his army days. Some battles are over before the first shot's fired, he muttered. You just have to know when to strike. If this story struck a chord, if you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted most, remember this. Patience, truth, and integrity are stronger than any lie. Jack didn't just get even, he got justice. And so can you. We tell stories like this to remind you that dignity, family, and legacy still matter in a world that often forgets them. If you believe that too, do us a favor. Like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the quietest man in the room has the loudest victory.